So now we're going to show you how to swap a fan motor on a Snakky. First of all, you need to take the guard off. So the guard, if you pull it with your hand, should just pop out. Take that out completely and remove that, put it to one side. Now you've got some screws to undo. So there's two screws at the back, there and there. Two screws at the front, this one and this one. And then there's 4 screws along the very bottom of the vent bucket and across the bottom. So take those 4 screws out. Once you've done that, you're then able to just slide the bucket out. So if you take your hands and you pull it towards you, the bucket should just slide straight out. Here's the fan motor that's got an issue with it. Try and twist it with your hand. You can see that it turns a little bit and then stops. And to double check that the fan motor isn't working, if you go into the menu button, press C, which should take you to the tech menu. And then if you press 0 and scroll through till you get to tech for test, press E to enter into test mode. Now you want to press 0 twice until you get to auto test and then press enter. Now it'll ask you to test a series of things. So we're looking for the compressor, so press C till you get to test compress and then press enter. Now that fan motor should now be spinning. It's obviously not spinning, so we need to change the fan motor. Try and twist it with your hand again. Nothing's happening, and then it's obviously the fan motor has failed. So to take the chiller out, you need to remove this top metal plate. So there's 2 screws at the front that you need to undo. The 2 screws at the very back, you don't need to completely take them out, just loosen those up. And then 2 screws at the front again here that you need to unscrew. Once you've screwed those 4 at the front, loosen the 2 at the back, then you should be able to take the panel off. But before you do that, just make sure that the temperature probe is removed from the silver plate, pull it forward and lift it off. Now to remove the chiller, you need to take the 2 screws off at the front. So you've got 2 brackets here, plastic brackets. If you remove those screws, once you've removed those screws, then you need to unplug the chiller. So if you look at the wiring, there's 3 connections. 2 top connections are for the back fans, and the bottom connection is the actual power to the chiller unit. So if we take those 3 off, and then start to pull the chiller out. You've got this plastic bung here that holds the wires and the chiller pipe in. Just try and remove that out of the way, and then you can lift that up. Just need to be a bit careful because this is all copper piping, so you don't want to tear the pipe in any way, so please be careful as you are taking it out. Once you've done that, you should be able to then start to pull the chiller forward, but also be careful because you've got the wires for the chiller and you've got the temperature probe. You don't want to catch them or snag them, so as you start pulling it out a little bit, then start pulling it. Okay, now with the chiller completely removed, you can see you need to take this screw off to take the actual fan blade off. So once you've removed that screw, remove the fan blade, and just take a note of the actual arrow pointing down on one of the fins. So you need to make sure when you put it back on later that you put it back on at the same way that you take it off. So put that to one side, and then you can see this is the actual fan motor housing in place here. Now you've got to unscrew these 2 bolts. So the fan motor sits on a bracket which screws to the actual base of the chiller unit, What we normally do is tip it on its side so you can get access to both sides of the bolts, and then with some pliers or socket set or a ratchet you need to remove those 2 bolts. I would advise at this point you use a socket set. Socket sets are much easier to unscrew these bolts. I didn't have a socket set with me at the time, so I've had to improvise. Okay, so once you've removed that, it should be connected, and sometimes they are cable tied. The wiring is cable tied to the bracket, so make sure that you take some snips and just snip that cable tie off so you can get it out. Okay, so now if you look, the 2 screws underneath on the new fan motor should match the old fan motor, so you unscrew those and then you put the new fan motor on in its place. Once you've done that, you then need to connect it together. So what we've done here is we've snipped the wire off the old one, we've put a electrical block on one end, and then we've exposed the wiring on the new fan motor. We've used a wire stripper to strip the wires, and then we've put them into the block. Obviously brown on brown, green on green, and then blue on blue. Make sure that that is connected correctly, otherwise your fan motor will spin in correct way. Once you've done that, just make it all nice and tidy and clean by wrapping it up in some electrical tape so there's no risk of any contact with the base of the chiller. And then after that you need to reattach the fan motor to the base of the chiller, making sure that all the wiring is completely out of the way and it's not obstructing or getting in the way of the fan motor. You can see here we've put it back on and we've tightened the bolts back up so it now sits nice and flush with the base of the chiller unit. Now we're going to put this fan back on, but it is a little bit dirty. You can see over the months and weeks it's actually got quite grimy, so we'll give that a bit of wash. And then when we put it back on, you've got 4 locating holes, and on the actual new fan motor there should be 4 lugs that go into those holes, and just obviously make sure that the arrow is pointing down, facing forward. Once you've got that on, give it a little spin manually with your fingers just to make sure that it spins freely and there's nothing catching. If that fan motor's not housed correctly or it's slightly out of line, then you might sometimes you get the fan hitting the side of the chiller unit, which causes a big clicking sound when the fan motor's spinning. So just make sure that it spins freely. If it doesn't, there is a little adjustment on there. You can move the bracket of the fan motor left and right, forwards and backwards, so you can get that sorted. Okay, now we're ready to put it back in. So lift the top part of the chiller and press it over the top there, making sure you don't damage any of the drop sensors, and then lay the chiller down and start to push it back in. Every now and again you need to kind of pull the wires through, because obviously you need these coming through so we can plug it in, so don't trap them wires behind the chiller if you are pushing the chiller back in. The same goes for the temperature probe as well, because very often, as you can see there with the temperature probe, it looks like it's going inside the chiller. So you need to just make sure every time you push it back a little bit, make sure them wires are coming out and in the right positions. Okay, you know when you've got it in properly, when you can push it back to the original position and those plastic brackets on the front of the chiller line up with the holes. Stick that back behind the bung so it sits nice and flat, and the cables are easily now then plugged back in to the chiller. The two top cables, doesn't matter which ones you put in there because they both just power for the back fans, so either one of those will fit properly. And as I said before, now make sure they're lining up with the holes on the base of the machine so you can get a screw through to there. So put the screws back in there. Once you've done that, it's time to put the plate back on. So it's a real reversal of what we did earlier on. So you put it into the back two screws that we kept loose. Keyhole system in there, so you can push that in and then pull it forward. And then you want to get your screws back into the top two. I recommend doing the top two screws first because you've got a bit more access to wiggle it around. So once you put those screws in, then you can put the screws in the front. All these screws are slightly different, by the way, so once you've taken the screws out of the holes, you need to make sure you remember which screws go back in which holes, because some of them are slightly thinner threads and some of them are thicker threads, so you need to make sure you get the right screws in the holes, and then just try and get the temperature probe back into the existing cable tie that's on the... If you can't do that and it's difficult, you can always cut that off and then put a new cable tie on. Once you've done that, put the power key into the bottom of the machine so the power comes on, and then what you need to do is go back into the test mode, which we did previously, and test the motor. But before we do that, we just need to make sure, because the vending machine is still out of order, we need to clear the errors on the board. So if you press the menu button, go into the menu, you want Tech 1 failures, press enter and it'll show you tech reading, press enter again, failure reading is compress. So then you press 0 to failure reset, press enter, and the failure reset is done. So that's reset all errors on the board. And then if you go to the tech menu and go back to test, auto test, press enter, and then press C until you get to test compress. Once you're at test compress, press E to enter, and then that compressor should kick in and the fan motor should also turn. Now you can see there, successful swap of a fan motor, because that's now turning quite nicely and it sounds great. So we've done that. Turn it off in the program, it should then turn off. And just do this a couple of times just to make sure that the fan motor is kicking in when the compressor comes on as well. There we go. Excellent. Now that temperature should start to come down once you get the bucket back in, because we've had the door open for a while, so obviously the temperature inside the cabinet's gone high. And we're just going to have a look into the menu of cold parameters, and we can have a look at the temperature quickly to see what the temperature is set at. The lower the temperature, the harder the chiller needs to work. So most chillers are quite happy to run at 12 to 13 degrees, which is cold enough for the drinks to chill down, and it's not too low that the compressor has to continuously work hard to get down to that temperature. So it just prolongs the life of the chiller units. And that's it. Once you've done that, put the bucket back into the machine, and yeah, everything's sorted. Just make sure when you put the security flap back in that there's two wings on the bottom of each of on the security flap. You need to make sure that those wings are pointing towards you. Get it into position, and then you should easily just push that down. And just to make sure it's working, just pull the vent bucket open and see it slot back into place. And that's how you replace a fan motor on a Snakky.